Welcome to Cheat Sheet Tales, where secrets slip, lies unravel, and the truth always has a twist. Real stories, raw confessions, shocking betrayals. Drop a comment if you've ever caught a red flag too late. Now, let's get into today's tale. My grandfather's funeral. My parents told me to sit at the back. "You're just an intern. You don't represent this family?" My father scoffed. I held back tears until a stranger stood up and said, "Actually, she's the only one who stayed with him in his final hours." The whole room fell silent. "Just sit in the back, Lara. You're not here to represent the family." I stared at my father in disbelief. "I'm his granddaughter," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I took care of him. You're a research intern. That's all you are right now. This is a family event. Let us handle it." That was my welcome to my grandfather's funeral. I'm Lara, 27 years old, working in clinical research at Mass General in Boston. Not a doctor, but part of the patient care pipeline. I moved back to Providence a few months ago on an extended leave when my grandfather Elias took a turn for the worse. Stage 4 cancer, rapidly progressing. He'd been declining for a while, and eventually it became obvious there wasn't much time left. He didn't want to die in a hospital. He wanted to stay at home in the little 2-bedroom house he shared with my Aunt Mira. She's my father's younger sister, considered a kind of cautionary tale in our family. No husband, a patchwork work history, and no patience for keeping up appearances. But she was the only one in the family who ever felt safe around humans, so I moved into her spare room. The hospital bed took up most of the living room. We worked in shifts. She handled most of the meals and housework. I managed medications, charts, conversations with hospice nurses. I can't explain what it feels like to take care of someone in their final days unless you've done it. The watching, the waiting, the way their breathing changes, the way their hands get lighter, like they're already starting to go somewhere else. My parents visited twice, once to drop off a fruit basket and whisper to each other in the corner, like they were at a networking event. The second time was a 15-minute stop on their way back from a real estate auction in Newport. My father stayed in his coat the whole time. They didn't ask how he was doing. They didn't ask how we were doing. They stood over him like he was already gone, then left. A week later, he passed. Just me holding his hand while his breath came slower and slower until it just stopped. Mira was in the kitchen, talking to the hospice nurse on the phone. I whispered the rosary to him in Portuguese, the same one he used to say every night before bed. He was gone before she got back. The grief didn't hit all at once. It just sort of unfurled like cold fog. We called the funeral home. We chose the least expensive casket because that's what he would have wanted. Mira cried once in the shower, where she thought I couldn't hear her. I didn't cry until days later, when I found a small notebook of his filled with wood carving sketches, all labeled with names. My name appeared on almost every page. My parents took over the funeral planning. I found out the date and time via forwarded email. When I asked if they needed help, my mother said, "We've got it covered. Just show up on time." It was held at St. Anne's, an enormous old Catholic church in Providence, with ornate stained glass windows and that heavy incense-laced smell that clings to you like regret. I wore a simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to my college graduation. My hands were shaking when I walked in. That's when my father stopped me at the entrance. No hello, no eye contact. "Lara, please sit in the back," I frowned. "What? Why?" He didn't even blink. "You're just an intern. You don't represent this family. We're trying to keep things respectful." I wanted to say so many things, that I'd bathed his father, that I'd managed his meds, that I'd sat awake for hours just to make sure he didn't choke on his own breath, that my sleepless nights had been spent holding his hand through delirium, that he called out for me when he couldn't remember anyone else's name. But instead, I nodded. I turned and walked to the very last pew. My heels clicked against the marble floor like punctuation marks in a bad novel. I sat down alone, surrounded by people I didn't know. Mira hadn't arrived yet. I assumed she was running late, or maybe she couldn't bring herself to face them. The service started. My father gave the eulogy, talking about family legacy and honor and community contributions. All things that made Arter roll his eyes in real life. They had barely spoken in the last 2 years, but he made it sound like they'd been close. The words were hollow, carefully measured. I stared at the casket, my hands curled into fists. Then, as the priest began the prayers, a man in a gray coat stood up in the middle of the aisle. He cleared his throat. "Excuse me. Sorry to interrupt." Everyone turned. "I'm Dr. Caleb Voss. I work in palliative care at Rhode Island Hospital. I just wanted to speak for a moment." There was murmuring. My father looked like someone had slapped him. "I had the honor of supporting Mr. Dart and his family during his final weeks, and I just wanted everyone to know, while many of you may not have been present, there was one person who stayed with him every single day, including the night he passed." He paused and looked directly at me. "Lara, she was there. She never left. She made sure he wasn't alone." Silence. Heavy. Not respectful silence. Embarrassed silence. Confronted silence. My father didn't say a word. My mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I looked down at my lap, trying to keep my breath steady. After the service, people avoided me, some out of awkwardness, some because they were loyal to my parents. I stood in the hallway near the bathrooms, sipping bad church coffee and considering whether to just leave. That's when Mira showed up. Hair slightly wet from the rain, shoes mismatched. No apology. I heard she said simply, "Let's go." So we left. Just like that. I'll stop here for now, but if anyone's still reading, I'd like to share what happened at the reception and what came after. I think this might be where I start asking for advice, because I don't know where to go from here. You said, "Continue do not include ending yet." ChatGPT said, "We didn't speak in the car for the first few minutes." Mira drove her old Honda Civic like she always did. Casually, one hand resting on the gear stick, window cracked open even though it was drizzling. The city passed us in silence. Brick buildings, telephone poles, sagging porches, familiar and distant all at once. "Was that planned?" I finally asked. She glanced at me. "The doctor? No, but I'm glad someone said it." I let my head fall back against the seat. My cheeks still felt hot. I couldn't tell if it was shame or relief, probably both. I wasn't used to being seen in that family, certainly not defended. The reception was being held at my parents' house on the east side, a white colonial they'd renovated from top to bottom, filled with cool tones and angular furniture that no one actually sat on. I didn't want to go. Every inch of it made me feel like a stranger in my own bloodline, but Mira insisted. "If they're going to talk about you," she said, pulling up to the driveway, "you should at least get a plate of food out of it." Inside, everything smelled like warmed-over catered pasta and gardenia air freshener. Classical music played from speakers tucked behind decorative urns. People milled about with tiny plates, murmuring. My parents were stationed near the fireplace, entertaining some lawyer friends of theirs. Mauricio, my brother, stood by the kitchen island talking about market rates in Puckett. It was surreal, like Aurora hadn't just died, like he was some footnote in a business newsletter. Mira drifted toward the side table to grab food. I lingered near the staircase, unsure of what to do with myself. Then I heard my father's voice, low, agitated. I followed it without meaning to. He was speaking to Dr. Richter. "That was wildly inappropriate," he said in a strained whisper. Dr. Richter kept his voice calm. "It was the truth. This was a family funeral. You blindsided us in front of everyone." "She was the only one there," the doctor said, not budging. "She deserved to be acknowledged. That's not a slight. It's a fact." My stomach turned. I wanted to run again. I was already halfway back toward the foyer when someone else noticed me. "Lara," said Julian. He stepped into my path, wine glass in hand, always poised, always unreadable. "I didn't know you were here," he said. "Thought you'd left." I didn't answer. I looked past him at the cluster of guests, the forced conversations, the laughter that didn't belong. "You know, he said after a beat. "Dad's under a lot of pressure. This whole thing's been stressful." I turned to him. I was the one who watched Grandpa die. "I know," he said, as if that changed anything. Mira appeared beside me then, holding a small plate of olives and cheese cubes. "Ready?" she asked. I nodded. We walked out together, plates in hand, like party favors from a celebration we didn't sign up for. That night, we sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where Grandpa used to shuffle in every morning, slippers dragging, asking if the coffee was strong enough to keep a dead man up. The house felt smaller without him, too quiet. His chair was still by the window, dented with the shape of his spine. His flannel robe still hung by the bathroom door. Mira passed me a glass of red wine, and we sat in silence for a while. It wasn't comfortable exactly, but it was real. Nothing needed to be said. Eventually, I opened my laptop to check my email and saw the beginning of what would turn into a landslide. Messages. From cousins I hadn't heard from in years. Some just offered condolences. Some apologized for not coming to visit. One of my dad's second cousins said she'd had no idea I'd been so involved in his care and wished someone had told her sooner. The next day, one of RR's oldest friends, Mr. Hector, dropped by with a small, wooden box. He used to run a hardware store where Grandpa bought most of his tools. The box was filled with trinkets RR had carved over the years, small birds, crosses, little wooden spoons. Each one had a tiny piece of masking tape on the bottom, with my name written in his shaky cursive. He asked me to hold on to these. Hector said you'd know what to do with them when the time came. I closed the box and held it in my lap like something sacred. Later that week, a letter came in the mail, official looking, from a law firm I recognized as the one my parents used for their estate planning. Grandpa's will had been updated too, months before he died. He'd left most of his personal belongings, his journals, his tools, his photo albums, to Mira and me. Not money, not property, just the pieces that mattered, the pieces that held stories. My parents contested the will. Of course they did. Emails followed from their lawyer, from Julian, all framed in polite legal language that barely hid their fury. I didn't reply. Mira didn't either. What could we say that we'd already inherited? The only thing worth having, weren't interested in the fight, but that didn't mean we weren't affected by it. My father stopped speaking to me entirely. My mother sent a single message that just read, "This is disappointing." Mauricio removed me from the family group chat without a word. Some days I wonder what would have happened if Dr. Richter hadn't spoken up. If I'd just sat through the funeral in silence and then gone home, swallowed my grief like they expected, would I still feel like this strange blend of sadness and clarity? Or would it have taken me years to unravel the truth of my place in that family? I'm still figuring it out. But what I do know, what I keep coming back to, is this. Grief is a spotlight. It shows you who steps forward and who steps away. And not everyone who shares your blood deserves your presence when the lights come up. You said continue up to the ending. It must be a satisfying revenge ending without death and cruelty. ChatGPT said, about 3 weeks after the funeral, I got a call from a reporter. At first, I thought it was a prank, but she introduced herself professionally, gave me her credentials, and explained she was working on a piece for the Providence Journal, a feature on caregiving and elder neglect in upper-middle-class families. Somehow, she'd heard about Aurora Dart and the public moment at the funeral. Dr. Richter, she said, had given her my name, only with my permission, of course. I didn't say yes right away. My instinct was to protect what little piece I had left, but the thought stayed with me, the idea that maybe finally I could control the narrative. That maybe Grandpa's story and mine deserved to be heard the right way. After a few days, I called her back. We met at a quiet cafe just off Thayer Street. I brought a few of Grandpa's journals and some of the sketches he'd made for the kids he never got to see grow up. I told her everything, not just about the funeral, but about the long weeks of care, the silence from my family, the way people disappeared when things stopped being easy. She listened, took notes, and asked smart, respectful questions. She even visited Mira and took photos of the woodwork Grandpa had done before his hands gave out. A bench in the backyard, the birdhouses under the eaves. Quiet, lovely things he never bragged about. When the story came out, it was gentle and honest, titled The Quiet Goodbye: How One Granddaughter Gave Her Grandfather the Death He Deserved. It ran online and in print with a soft photo of his workbench on the front page of the Sunday Features section. The community responded in ways I didn't expect. I received emails, handwritten letters, even a few small donations addressed to Mira for the work she does. Strangers sent notes about how they wished they'd done more for their parents, their spouses, their aging neighbors. One woman said the article inspired her to finally reach out to her estranged sister after 5 years of silence. But what really cemented everything was what happened at Dart Reality. My parents' firm had always cultivated an image: high-end, family-oriented, deeply respected. Their clientele was mostly older, wealthier couples looking to sell family estates or buy investment properties. But Providence isn't as big as it thinks it is. Word got around. It started slowly. A couple of longtime clients canceled appointments. A lawyer who frequently referred them to estate executives stopped sending leads. And then one of their biggest listings, a $2.8 million home on the east side, was pulled by the family when they realized who my parents were. Apparently, the client had read the article, and they'd had their own quiet caregiving story. Their father had died of Alzheimer's. Their daughter had taken care of him. "I want to work with someone who understands what legacy means," they told the new agent who inherited the listing. It was a ripple, then a wave. By the start of spring, Dart really had lost nearly 40% of their senior portfolio. Not because I asked for it, not because I plotted revenge, but because the truth did what it always does. It settled in. And when truth is backed by grace and clarity, people pay attention. My mother finally called. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped and cautious. "Lara, we read the article. I hope you're happy." That was it. Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "We didn't realize what you were going through." Just blame, as always. I saved the voicemail but never responded. As for Julian, he emailed me a few weeks later. He was different, tentative. "Hey, I don't know if you want to hear from me. I read the story. I was wrong. I think I always knew you were doing more than we gave you credit for. I just didn't want to admit it. I'm sorry. I hope you're okay." I didn't know what to say to that either, but I didn't hate him for it. I knew what it was like to live in our family and survive by playing the part. Still, I didn't write back. Some bridges don't need to burn, but they don't need to be rebuilt either. Mira, meanwhile, took the donations she'd received and started a weekend woodcrafting class for caregivers at the local community center. She calls it Elias's Hands. I help out when I can, bringing snacks, setting up, teaching people how to use Grandpa's old chisels. We don't talk much about the funeral anymore, but sometimes while sanding a block of pine, Mira will glance up at me and say, "He'd be so damn proud of you." And that's enough. I went back to Boston, eventually took on a new role at the hospital, working more closely with palliative patients. It's not glamorous work. It's not what my family would ever put in a brochure, but it's mine. And when I think about Grandpa, about the quiet way he smiled when I read to him, the way he gripped my hand even when he couldn't speak, I know I was exactly where I needed to be. Not at the front of a church, but at the end of a life with love, with presence, with honor. And somehow, despite everything, I won, quietly, completely.